Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be doing a deep dive today on character building.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, it should be pretty cool. So we're looking at excerpts from this text called Awesome Character Building, which is kind of this interesting blend of like psychology, philosophy, and self-improvement.
Okay.
And, one of the first things that really jumped out at me was like this claim that we have like complete and total power to shape our habits and our character.
Hmm. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement, right?
It is.
It kind of makes you wonder if we're even tapping into like how much potential we have.
Right. Like, are we even using all of it?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious to see how this source, like, backs that up.
Yeah, me too. How do they explain that?
Well, they start by emphasizing thought as, like, the foundation of everything.
Okay.
Like, our actions, our habits, our character, really everything we do kind of stems from our thoughts.
Hmm. So is it just like positive thinking then?
It's a little deeper than that.
Yeah.
They use this analogy of like, the reflex nerve system.
Mm-hmm.
So you know how like the more you repeat an action, the easier it becomes? Like riding a bike.
Right, like it becomes second nature.
Exactly. Yeah, you might be all wobbly at first, but eventually it's like you don't even have to think about it.
Right.
So this text argues that our thoughts work in a very similar way.
Okay.
So like every time we think a thought, we're kind of strengthening that neural pathway.
Oh.
So it becomes easier to think that thought again in the future.
So like if you're thinking negative thoughts all the time, then it's easier to think negative thoughts. But if you're thinking positive thoughts.
It's easier to think positive thoughts.
Gotcha. So you're almost like training your brain how to think.
Exactly. And they really kind of drive this point home with this. It's a pretty dramatic example of this cashier.
Oh, okay.
So he starts reading about like all these get-rich-quick schemes.
Uh-huh.
And he starts like fantasizing about taking funds from his work to like get in on the action.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, slippery slope for sure.
Yeah. That's a pretty intense example, I think.
Right.
And I can definitely see how dwelling on a thought like that, could lead to like some really bad decisions.
Right.
But I think sometimes those negative thought patterns, are a lot more subtle.
Right.
Like what about, things like chronic self-doubt
Right.
or insecurity?
Yeah.
How do we apply this to those kind of things?
That's a great question. So they talk about this technique that they call the law of indirectness.
Okay.
And basically, it's not about like suppressing those negative thoughts, but more about shifting your focus to something positive.
Yeah.
So instead of like battling with that inner critic, you might redirect your attention to like, a project that you're passionate about or a skill you want to develop.
So it's not about like ignoring the negative thought, but more about choosing to focus your energies somewhere else.
Precisely. They compare it to catching a match before it like sets a whole building on fire.
Oh, wow.
If you can catch it early, a quick puff of air puts it out, but if you let it linger.
It's going to be a huge problem.
Yeah.
I like that analogy. I think that really illustrates it well.
Yeah.
So if we can apply that to like breaking bad habits, like in that cashier example, can we use that to cultivate like good habits too?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think that's where this idea gets really powerful. Like they give the example of managing anger. So let's say you're someone who, tends to react with anger pretty quickly. Instead of letting that anger control you, you consciously choose a different response.
Right.
Like maybe you would take a few deep breaths, count to 10, or even, use humor to kind of diffuse the situation.
Right.
But over time, by choosing a different thought pattern.
You retrain your brain to respond differently.
Exactly.
So instead of anger being your like default reaction, you build a new default.
Yeah.
Maybe it's patience or understanding or, like you said, even humor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this brings us to like one of the core ideas from this text, and that is, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. We literally become what we consistently think about. And it's not just about like our inner world either.
Wait, are you saying our thoughts can actually influence like what happens to us too?
That's what this text is suggesting.
Right.
They're arguing that our thoughts actually attract corresponding experiences into our lives. So if we're constantly thinking about like lack, we might be more likely to notice and experience lack. But if we cultivate an abundance mindset, we're more likely to attract abundance. It's like our thoughts create a certain frequency, and then the universe responds to that.
That's pretty interesting. It kind of makes you think about your thoughts in a different way,
Yeah.
I imagine that some people might be thinking like, okay, this all sounds really great, but it doesn't happen overnight, right?
You're absolutely right. They acknowledge that progress can feel really slow, especially at first.
Yeah.
They compare it to a musician painstakingly practicing, like a difficult piece of music.
Uh-huh.
You know, those initial stages can be so frustrating when you're like fumbling through the notes.
Right.
And everything sounds terrible, but the key is to keep practicing consistently.
So even if it feels like you're not making progress, it's that consistent effort that leads to mastery.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just like that musician eventually plays the piece flawlessly, we too can master our thoughts and habits, with dedicated practice. It's like we're building that mental muscle, strengthening our capacity for self-control and change. But this kind of brings up another question about, what about character building, like later in life?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, we've all heard the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Right.
Does the source address that at all?
They make this really interesting point about how people experience aging very differently.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, some people age gracefully, and then others.
Yeah, maybe not so gracefully.
Yeah, and I think we've all seen that.
Yeah, for sure. So what do they think makes that difference?
They use this really brilliant analogy of an apple tree.
Okay.
So you might have two apples that look almost identical, but as they mature,
they reveal their true nature. Like one is sweet and juicy, and the other one's like sour and mealy.
Exactly. And so the source is suggesting that just like those apples, our long-held thoughts and habits become more prominent as we age.
Okay, so the people who've been cultivating kindness and patience and wisdom.
Those qualities shine through even more.
But on the flip side, the people who have been, like, harboring negativity.
Yeah, those patterns become more pronounced.
Wow.
It's this powerful reminder that, like, the choices we make today about our thoughts and actions, they're shaping not just our present selves, but also the person we'll become down the road.
Right. You're planting the seeds now that are going to bear fruit in the future.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. And the source also talks about developing like a philosophy early on, right?
Yes. And they contrast the potential emptiness of chasing like purely material success with the deeper satisfaction that like a guiding philosophy can provide. It's almost like having this compass, that helps you navigate like all the complexities of life and make choices that are aligned with your values.
So even if it means getting teased or questioned by other people, having that compass is what leads to a more fulfilling life.
That's what this text suggests.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be some rigid or like complicated philosophy.
Right.
Just a core set of values and principles that guide your actions.
Yeah.
And give your life meaning.
And I think that sense of purpose, that's essential at any age.
Absolutely. It's like finding your center.
Yeah.
That place of inner peace and strength. And you know what? They use this really beautiful image in the text to describe like how we can stay connected to that center.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
It is by the winds of heaven blowing over it continually and keeping it in constant motion, or by its continual onward movement, that the water in pool or stream is kept sweet and clear, for otherwise it would become stagnant and covered with slime.
Wow, that's a really powerful image. It really speaks to the importance of staying like engaged throughout your life.
Yes.
Constantly learning and growing, not getting stuck.
Like that flowing water constantly refreshing itself.
Exactly.
And I think that applies to our relationships too. They talk about the importance of reciprocity regardless of age differences.
Right. So recognizing the value in every interaction, no matter how old or young someone is.
Yes. And breaking down those barriers and seeing each other as fellow travelers on this journey called life. Speaking of journeys, this makes me think about what the source said about life being like a play. Right, they're saying life's like a play with all these different roles, and we each have our own unique part to play.
So to build character in this like play of life, we have to figure out what role we're meant to play. I mean, that sounds kind of overwhelming.
I don't think it's so much about figuring out the role, but more about how we play it. The text emphasizes playing our part bravely and making a good entrance and exit. It encourages us to really embrace the challenges we face, to see those tough moments as opportunities for growth,
I like that. It's like an actor rehearsing a difficult scene. Each time they go through it, they learn something new and refine their craft. So the challenges we face are kind of helping us refine our character, our approach to life.
Exactly. And the source makes a point of saying that this playing our part should also include taking care of our inner lives.
Right. That's so important. Especially in a world that's like go, go, go all the time,
Yeah.
where everyone's so busy and focused on achievement. It's easy to forget about that inner world. How does the source suggest we nurture that part of ourselves?
Well, they talk about the significance of taking quiet time
Okay.
for reflection, meditation, for connecting with what they call the infinite or a higher power. It's about making space in our lives to reconnect with that deeper part of ourselves, to tap into that inner source of wisdom and intuition.
That makes sense. I'm wondering if they talk about how different cultures approach this, though. I mean, some cultures seem to place more emphasis on contemplation and stillness,
Right.
and others are all about action and, getting things done.
You're right. There are definitely different approaches. The text actually makes this interesting comparison between what they call the contemplative Orient
Okay.
and the more active Occident.
Oh, interesting. So the East being more about quiet reflection, things like meditation and mindfulness,
Mm,
and the West being more focused on action and like accomplishment.
exactly. But
Yeah.
they're not saying that one is better than the other.
Right.
It's more about finding the balance that works for you. You need both that inner stillness and the outer action to live a truly fulfilling life.
Yeah, like those yin and yang energies,
Yeah.
each one kind of balancing and enhancing the other. Speaking of balance, something that I always think about when we talk about character is nature versus nurture. How much is our character like predetermined by our genes,
Right.
and how much is shaped by our choices?
That's a great point, and one that the source addresses directly. While they acknowledge that heredity plays a role, they really push back against the idea that it dictates our destiny. They specifically criticize the logic behind sayings like, in Adam's fall, we sinned all.
So we're not just products of our past or our circumstances.
Right.
We can actually choose a different path.
Exactly. And they emphasize that true self-mastery, that ability to consciously shape our character that transcends any inherited tendencies.
Okay.
We're not just reacting to our genes. We can actually evolve beyond them.
That's a really empowering message. It means we're not stuck with whatever hand we're dealt. We can choose to become the people we want to be. But how does that tie back into like character building as a whole?
That brings us to what I think is one of the most powerful takeaways from this whole source. They're arguing that when we invest in our inner lives, when we put in the work to cultivate positive qualities and build a strong character, we're building something that lasts, creating a foundation that can withstand the test of time.
It's like the difference between building a house on sand versus building it on solid rock. That house built on a foundation of character, purpose, inner strength. That's the kind of house that can weather any storm.
I love that. It really captures what this text is saying. And to drive the point home, they end with this quote from Whittier's poem. I know not where his islands lift their fronded palms in air. I only know I cannot drift beyond his love and care.
Wow, that's really beautiful. It evokes this real sense of hope and trust. It's like saying that even when life feels uncertain, and you can't see the path ahead, there's a deeper current, a guiding force that's there to support us.
And that trust, that faith in something bigger than ourselves, I think that can be an incredible source of strength.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially when you're facing those inevitable challenges, that are a part of any growth process. Speaking of challenges, the source also dives into the topic of breaking bad habits. Do you remember that example with the young man and his gradual liking for intoxicants?
Yes. It really highlighted how easy it can be to fall into those negative patterns. And often without even realizing it. Like that first step might seem harmless enough, but then one drink leads to another, and before you know it...
You're stuck in a cycle that's really hard to break. But they emphasize that it's never too late to turn things around.
Really?
Even if you've been struggling with a bad habit for a long time.
So even if someone is dealing with, an addiction, there's still hope for them to change.
Absolutely. And the key, according to the source, is to catch those negative thoughts early on, before they gain too much momentum. It's like catching that match before it sets the whole building on fire.
Right. Which brings us back to that law of indirectness. So instead of dwelling on the craving, he could shift his focus to something more positive.
Exactly. Maybe he visualizes himself living this healthy, sober life, or thinks about all the things he'll be able to accomplish once he breaks free from the addiction. It's about replacing those negative thought patterns with more positive ones.
It's like retrain your brain, building new neural pathways that support the changes you want to make. And this doesn't just apply to breaking bad habits, right?
No.
You could use this approach to cultivate any desirable character trait, I think.
Yeah.
Like patience, kindness, courage, anything you want to develop.
Exactly. It's about taking that proactive approach to shaping our character, becoming the people we aspire to be. And it's not something you do once and then you're done.
Right.
It's an ongoing process, this journey of self-discovery and growth that lasts a lifetime.
Right. You're constantly refining your craft, becoming more skilled at navigating all the complexities of life. But this brings up another question for me. Like, how do we find that balance between focusing on our own personal growth and also, like, contributing to something larger than ourselves?
That's a really important point. And I think it speaks to something that the source emphasizes throughout, this idea that character building isn't just about individual improvement.
Okay.
It also has this ripple effect on the world around us.
So when we work on becoming more kind and compassionate and having more integrity, it's not just benefiting us.
Right.
It's actually like radiating outwards and touching the lives of everyone we interact with.
Exactly. It's like our inner light shines brighter.
Yeah.
And in doing so, it kind of illuminates the path for others as well.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's like we become these beacons of positivity,
Yes.
inspiring the people around us to try to reach their highest potential too.
And this brings us back to that idea of finding our center, that inner compass, that guides our actions and helps us move through life's challenges. But how do we actually find that center? Does the source give us any guidance on that? They don't really give like a step-by-step guide, but they do offer some really good insights. Remember that analogy of the water staying fresh because it's moving and changing?
Yeah. Like it was talking about how important it is to stay, engaged and adaptable, keep learning and growing.
Exactly. And I think that really applies to finding our center too. It's not necessarily this like fixed point we reach.
Right.
It's more about cultivating that connection, that awareness of what really matters and letting that guide us.
So it's like an ongoing process of exploration.
Yeah, I think so.
We might find that our center shifts over time as we learn and grow.
I think that's a really beautiful way to look at it. It's about staying open to those new possibilities. But it's not always easy, right?
No, not always.
There are going to be times when we feel lost or uncertain. Times when those challenges feel overwhelming. What do they say about those times?
Well, they kind of go back to that idea of, trusting in that guiding force.
Okay.
Whether we call that God or the universe or just like the inherent goodness of life.
Right.
Even when we can't see the path ahead, we can trust that like we're being guided.
Yeah, that resonates with me. It's like even when things feel really chaotic, there's that deeper order at play.
Yeah.
A purpose that we might not understand at the time.
I think so. It's like those challenges are there to shape us.
Right.
Help us grow stronger, not to break us.
And that's where that analogy of the musician comes back in.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, about persistent practice.
Even when it feels hard.
Even when it's frustrating.
Exactly. Embrace the process. Every step, every stumble. It's all part of it.
It's not about being perfect, right?
No.
It's about showing up, doing the work, even when it's tough. And I think that applies to character building as a whole. It's a lifelong process.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's a rewarding one.
It really is. And I think that's what makes this text so inspiring. It reminds us that we have the power to choose who we want to be.
Yeah.
What kind of impact we want to make.
And that impact, that ripple effect, that's where it all comes full circle.
Right.
When we cultivate those qualities of kindness, compassion, integrity.
It makes the world a better place.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we're all connected and that even small acts can have a big impact. So as we wrap up this deep dive on character building, what's the biggest takeaway for you?
I think just remembering that we're not stuck.
Yeah.
We get to choose who we become.
And that choice, that commitment to growth is what really shapes our destiny.
It's like we're the artists of our own lives.
I love that.
And every thought, every action is a brushstroke.
It really underscores the responsibility we have to make those conscious choices.
Yeah.
To be intentional about who we want to be and what kind of world we want to create.
It's a call to action.
Yeah.
To step into our power,
What a fantastic way to end this episode. I hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought as you continue on your own journey of, building your best self. And before you go, I'd love for you to think about this. What's one habit or character trait that you would like to cultivate, knowing now just how powerful your thoughts and actions really are? Think about it. And until next time, keep on diving deep.